Why are you listening to me? I don't care what you do once this thing's over with. You can lay down and die and rot in the street.
For more than half a century, the name Dan Blocker has carried a kind of warmth that few television stars ever managed to earn. As Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza, he was the gentle giant of the Ponderosa, a man-mountain with a laugh that could fill a room and a heart that seemed even bigger than his frame. Audiences across America welcomed him into their living rooms every Sunday night, and for 14 seasons, he gave them something rare. A character who felt genuinely good, not as a performance, but as a reflection of the man behind the role. But Dan Blocker died young. On May 13, 1972, following complications from what should have been a routine gallbladder surgery, he was gone at just 43 years old. The shock of his passing rippled through Hollywood, through television, and through the millions of households that had grown to love Hoss Cartwright as though he were family. And it rippled most deeply through his own family, through his wife Dolphia, and through their 4 children, who were left to grieve privately while the rest of the world grieved publicly. Now, decades later, one of those children has stepped forward. At 66, Dirk Blocker, who followed his father into acting, perhaps most recognized today for his role on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, has opened up about the man he knew not as Hoss Cartwright, but simply as his father. What he has shared confirms something many longtime fans have long suspected, that Dan Blocker was, in every measurable way, an even more remarkable human being off-screen than he ever was on it. Dirk Blocker was shaped by an unusual childhood. Growing up as the son of one of the most recognizable faces on American television meant that privacy was a luxury the family rarely enjoyed. Dan Blocker stood well over 6 feet tall and weighed well over 300 pounds. A physical presence so distinctive that anonymity was virtually impossible wherever he went. Family vacations became public events. Simple errands turned into impromptu fan gatherings. The man who played Hoss Cartwright could not simply walk down a street without being recognized, called out to, and surrounded. For young Dirk, watching this unfold shaped his entire relationship with the idea of fame. Where some children of celebrities grow up chasing the spotlight their parents occupied, Dirk moved in the opposite direction. He wanted to act. That passion was genuine and inherited, but he had no desire for the kind of recognition that had made his father's personal life so complicated. He chose the path of a character actor deliberately, building a career rooted in craft rather than celebrity. In doing so, he was, in his own quiet way, honoring a lesson his father had modeled, that the work itself matters more than the applause that follows it. What Dirk has confirmed, speaking now with the perspective that only 6 decades of living can provide, is that the qualities audiences saw in Hoss Cartwright were not invented by writers or shaped by directors. They came directly from Dan Blocker himself. The warmth was real. The humor was real. And the deep, unshakable commitment to fairness and human dignity, that was perhaps the most real thing about him. Dan Blocker was born on December 10, 1928, in DeKalb, Texas, arriving into the world at a weight of 14 pounds, a detail that seemed almost mythological even at the moment of his birth. He grew up in the small town of O'Donnell, Texas, working alongside his family, absorbing the values of a community where hard work and treating people decently were simply the way things were done. By age 10 he was doing the labor of grown men. By 12 he had already reached 6 feet in height. The nickname, the Big Un, followed him naturally. What is less often discussed is the depth of the man who grew from that Texas childhood. Dan Blocker earned a master's degree in theater. He read widely, thought seriously, and held opinions that he was not afraid to voice even when they were unpopular. He served in the Korean War as a combat infantry sergeant, earning a Purple Heart after being wounded while pulling a fellow soldier from the line of fire. He came home from that war changed, and thereafter became an outspoken opponent of military violence, a position that took genuine courage to hold publicly during the era in which he lived. It was that same courage that expressed itself during a filming trip to the American South in the 1960s, when the Bonanza cast and crew arrived at a hotel that refused to accommodate their African-American colleagues. Dan Blocker did not hesitate, did not equivocate, and did not quietly look the other way. He announced, plainly and firmly, that if the hotel would not house every member of the team, then no member of the team would be staying there. He meant it. And that was the end of it. In a 1964 interview, he put his personal philosophy in equally plain terms. He said he hated a bully worse than anything, and that if he saw a larger man beating on a smaller one, he would intervene without hesitation. He understood that his size gave him a kind of power, and he understood that power carried responsibility. Dirk Blocker grew up watching his father navigate that responsibility. He watched him use his platform thoughtfully, speak his mind honestly, and resist the easier path of staying silent to protect his career. Dan Blocker openly criticized the Vietnam War at a time when doing so was professionally risky for a television star of his standing. He expressed genuine concern for underpaid teachers. He even reflected, with characteristic self-awareness, that there was an irony to a man of his convictions becoming wealthy through show business, reportedly acknowledging once that he had, in his words, sold out for money. But the self-awareness itself was telling. This was not a man who accepted comfort without examining it. What Dirk has shared in recent years paints a portrait of a father who was thoughtful, present, and deeply principled, a man who made sure his children understood the world they lived in and their obligations within it. The household Dan and his wife Dolphia built was grounded and warm, a deliberate counterpoint to the chaos of public life. When the family relocated to Switzerland in the early 1970s, seeking distance from the pressures of Hollywood and the political turbulence of the Vietnam era, it was not an act of escape so much as a search for space to be a family without an audience. In Switzerland, Bonanza aired in German. The language barrier gave Dan Blocker something he had almost never experienced during his years of American fame: the ability to move through the world without being immediately recognized. He described the Swiss countryside with genuine affection, and the family flourished there. His children attended international schools. He found, for perhaps the first time in years, something resembling a normal life. Then came May of 1972, and with it, the event that Dirk Blocker has described as the central rupture of his life. His father entered surgery for gallbladder removal, a procedure common enough that no one in the family anticipated what followed. But Dan Blocker suffered a pulmonary embolism in the aftermath of the operation. He died at Daniel Freeman Hospital in Englewood, California. He was 43 years old. Dirk was a teenager. The loss was enormous and immediate, and it did not diminish with time so much as it transformed, settling over the years into something he carried rather than something that carried him. He has spoken about how his grief expressed itself largely through immersion in work and daily life, how he held himself together outwardly while processing something inwardly that resisted easy resolution. What he has also spoken about is how his understanding of his father grew richer as he himself aged. The things a teenager cannot fully see in a parent, the complexity of their choices, the weight of their history, the texture of their private convictions, become visible later, sometimes much later. Dirk came to see his father not simply as the warm and funny man who had played Hoss Cartwright, but as someone who had lived a genuinely examined life. A man who had seen war and come home opposed to it. A man who had achieved extraordinary fame and remained quietly uncomfortable with it. A man who had made his convictions concrete and public at moments when it would have been far easier to stay quiet. The revelation that Dirk has confirmed, the thing that fans long suspected but never had verified, is that Dan Blocker's goodness was not a performance. It was not a character trait maintained for the cameras or shaped by the demands of a role. The gentleness, the humor, the moral seriousness, the instinct to protect those who were being treated unfairly, these were not qualities that Dan Blocker put on when the cameras were rolling and set aside when they stopped. They were the man himself, present in his home, in his relationships, in his choices about where to live and how to speak and what to stand for. For fans of Bonanza, this confirmation matters more than it might seem. There is a particular kind of affection that audiences develop for characters like Hoss Cartwright, characters whose goodness feels earned rather than scripted. Part of what made Hoss so beloved was the intuition, even if it was never consciously articulated, that the kindness viewers were watching was not entirely fictional. That somewhere behind the performance was something genuine. Dirk Blocker's reflections, offered now from the vantage point of his own mid-60s, confirmed that intuition. His father was the real thing. Dan Blocker's death changed Bonanza permanently, and the show did not survive long without him. NBC moved it from its long-held Sunday night time slot to Tuesday evenings, where it struggled against competing programming, and the series was canceled in 1973 after 14 seasons. Those who worked on the show have spoken over the years about how palpable his absence was on set, how the familiar rooms of the Cartwright Ranch felt different without him, how the humor and warmth that had been so natural when he was present were impossible to manufacture in his absence. Michael Landon, who played Little Joe and who had been one of Dan's closest friends, serving as best man at Landon's wedding, took on the painful task of writing the first episode after Dan's passing. He chose not to explain Hoss's absence explicitly, instead allowing the grief to exist in silence, in the unspoken weight that settled over the Cartwright family. It was a tribute as much as it was a storytelling decision. Dirk Blocker has built his own quiet and respected career over the decades, working steadily in television and film without ever seeking the level of fame his father achieved. The choice, as he has made clear, was deliberate. He understood what that level of fame cost, having watched his father navigate it up close. He chose craft over celebrity, character work over stardom, and in doing so honored his father in a way that required no press release and no announcement. At 66, reflecting on a father he lost when he was still a teenager, Dirk Blocker has given something valuable to the people who have carried Dan Blocker's memory forward across more than 50 years. He has confirmed what they felt but could not prove, that the man they loved on screen was worthy of being loved for exactly the reasons they loved him. Hoss Cartwright was a character. Dan Blocker was something rarer, a genuinely good man. And now, finally, his son has said so plainly, for all of them to hear.